very much. Dr. Babin.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Appreciate your testimony. Dr. Brauman, I would like to ask you first. I have the honor of serving as the ranking member on the Space Subcommittee, as well as getting to represent Johnson Space Center. And I've seen many examples of NASA's collaborations with private partners to foster innovation and technological growth. And from remote sensing robotics to GPS and technologies for growing crops in space, NASA's space exploration and science, Earth science efforts have yielded remarkable benefits for farms and economic activities and industries. Do you see more collaborative opportunities like these to address the issues that we're discussing today of biodiversity?
Absolutely. I have actually received a grant from NASA last year to run a series of workshops where we brought practitioners as well as researchers together to look at better ways to use Earth observations as we assess and do management based on ecosystem services. And it's clear that there's a tremendous opportunity. One of the things that's also very clear is that in addition to more basic research, we need to be supporting a lot of the background systems that make the kind of information that NASA is developing more accessible to more people. So if you're an expert, if this is what you do for a living, it's easy to grab their data and do informative things, but it's hard if you're not.
Great, thank you very much. And Mr. Goodwin, the threat of pollution on biodiversity and ecosystems is a global issue, and a solution is reliant on the participation of other countries as well as us. How can we ensure that other countries, big polluters like China and India, are taking the steps towards cleaner solutions, and that the financial burden of tackling global pollution isn't solely on the backs of the American taxpayer?
I'd have to say that's out of my wheelhouse. I could speak to the benefits and the good things that our producers here in the United States are doing, but I'm not your guy for China.
Okay. But you catch my drift, though, right? Well, I'll ask you another one. You mentioned in your testimony many different practices that have increased soil health and productivity. Similarly, to my second question, do you see any other countries adopting similar measures? Now, that may be out of your wheelhouse, too. And how can we make sure that these other countries are taking steps forward in these areas as well, and that the U.S. is not the only party making these strides?
Well, certainly for soil health management strategies, this revolution is not it's not solely performed in the United States. There are producers, ag producers all around the world implementing these principles. And if we focus on the key core soil health building principles, when we look at habitat and we look at diversity, often we look at it from the top down, and I would submit we need to look at it from the bottom up. We need to fix the foundation, increase the soil health, increase the plant communities. Those plant communities provide the habitat for those wildlife species. Those principles work whether you're in Nairobi, Kenya, or in Muskogee, Oklahoma.
Okay. Do you believe it should be the role of the American taxpayer through taxes and regulations to be responsible for solving these issues? And do you believe that through private partner relationships that we can foster innovation and efficiency?
I most certainly think there's opportunity for partnerships. I do think it's the role of each individual producer to have the ability and the freedom to operate their producer or their private property as they need to, and more producers are seeing that these ecologically focused principles are benefiting us in both ways, both economically and ecologically.
But is it the American taxpayer's job to solve the problems on the global issues?
No, sir.
Okay.
It is not.
All right. And then also, my last question, I represent Southeast Texas, which is home to a lot of ag, and it just so happens in my district is unfortunately also in a flood-prone region with hurricanes. This has created a lot of issues with harvesting and crop production. Can you elaborate a little bit on how some of these new practices could help protect crops and soil during inclement weather and floods?
Well, certainly, if we look at again those foundational principles, the first one is keeping the ground covered. We don't want those erosive losses providing further sediment downstream any more than anybody else does.
Right.
And so, yes, the principles help us build the ability and the capacity for those soils to hold water back. And so we're gonna fix these ecological problems with principles, not just applying practices on the landscape. We have to rethink how we look at it, and focus our practices and look at our practices as a set of tools and implement those where they need to be locally.